Hello. Today, we're going to talk about doing an amendment on an award. This could be an increment of funding, it could be a supplement, it could be a no-cost extension, really any change that needs to happen on an award document. We're going to go through the basic steps of how to set all of that up. So we're going to go to Central Admin, and we are going to search for our award document. I know my award number, so I can search for it directly. You can search by any criteria you have based on the modification document you got from the sponsor. So we are going to open our award, and we can see here, we can scroll down and see we have version 1 of our award. That's great. We can go down and see the funding that we had in place and everything else. That's all good. The first step at the bottom of the screen is going to be to edit our award. So now we've gotten into our award, and we can go down, and I want to talk about the funding proposals panel a little bit. We can see here the initial proposal that was in place, and that's great. If we're doing something like an increment, the way we are in this particular example, that was probably included in the scope of that initial proposal, you might not need to do anything with the funding proposals panel on a change. If you're doing something like a no-cost extension that's not grantee approved, that you had to route, you might have a proposal document for that. If you have a supplement, which you very likely had to route to get approval for the additional money, you might want to link to another proposal. You'll have to choose one of these merge types, and I talked about them a little bit in a previous video in this series. There is an article on Zendesk that I will link in the description below. So you can get a sense of what would be most appropriate for the type of modification you're doing. But in most cases, you won't have to add an IP. You can link multiple IPs if that's appropriate. So the next thing we're going to want to do is choose our transaction type. You'll notice all of these fields have been wiped out. And that's because this is a new transaction. Everything else in the award will stay the same, and we can update it as appropriate. But we will need to come here. And I'm going to choose allotment. I'll put in today as the notice date, and we can put in year 2 of 5, or whatever comments are appropriate for this transaction. Coming down and looking at the rest of the information, if we have a modification ID, we might want to put that in. You know, this being the first increment, our modification ID is likely to be 001, but there may have been other actions. And so you can come in here and put whatever the most up-to-date modification ID is. If we look at time and money, everything here is editable. I'm not going to edit any of this information here because I want to show the full functionality with time and money. It's important as an institution that you use one of these areas or the other. If you do want to use the simplified data entry that is here, you want to always make your changes here and never use the time and money document. If you do want the more robust reporting options that come with time and money, you want to always load in data via the time and money document. There is a parameter that allows you to force your users to use the time and money document. And I recommend that if you do want that reporting robustness, that you turn off this simplified data entry. So we've put in our modification ID. If there's anything else that needs to change based on the nuance of this particular increment, we could come in and make those changes here. The most likely area are comments, notes, and attachments, but really we can go anywhere and make changes to the data at this point. But likely with an increment, really the most important thing is just to document that that's what the transaction is, put some information in the comments, and maybe capture our modification ID. So I'm going to come here to Award Actions. And we're going to take a look at data validation. And I'm going to run that to make sure I don't have any validations. And I do not. My validations are in good order. So I can come down here and hit submit. And now my award is in final status and everything is in good shape. I haven't added the actual money associated with this increment. We're going to do that with the time and money panel. So similar to the award, this is in a read-only mode, and I do need to come down here and explicitly indicate that I want to edit the time and money document. So I already have my description, which is good. Because this isn't the first transaction, I'm not going to have a defaulted transaction type. I need to choose the appropriate transaction again. So allotment increment, I'll put in today's notice date. And I can put in comments. I'm going to do year 2 of 5 again. It's optional. You can have your own naming conventions at your institution. So the first thing we want to do, because this is an increment, we're now authorized to spend money for an additional year. as would typically happen when an increment is added. So we want to come to our obligation end date and extend that by a year. So that takes care of the time portion of the increment. Then we're going to come down to transactions. And again, similar to before, we're bringing in new money from the outside. So the source award is external and the destination award is our award ID. And we want to just put in money into obligated now, because if you'll remember from the previous video, we set up our full 5-year amount for anticipated funding. We're going to come in here and put in our next $25,000 of obligated. In this case, I'm doing the increments as being the same amount for each year. I know that is often not the case, but for the simplicity of this example, it makes things a little bit easier. And we're going to hit add. So now we can see our transaction has been added. And if we come up here, we can see the money's been added here as well. We now have $50,000 to represent the first 2 years of funding in obligated direct, and $10,000 representing the first 2 years of funding in obligated F&A, and then the total adds as well. The anticipated didn't increase, but that was expected. We're seeing the addition of our transaction because here we have the view set to pending. We can set the view to current, and then that will show us what is currently finalized and approved in the system. And we can still look down here at our transaction. And there might be cases where you want to see that just to be certain. And then we can flip back to pending so we can see the result of our transactions. And if you were to do an amendment where there were multiple transactions, the pending would aggregate the effects of all of those transactions on the award. So this looks good. I'm going to come here and press submit. And now we finalized our time and money document. I'm going to return to award. And then from here, we can come down and we see our most recent transaction information. And we can also see that the money has been added to the time and money panel, which is great. If we scroll down a little bit more, we have the edit button again. This second increment is finalized, so the system is ready if we wanted to do another amendment. There is one other thing that has now been added to the screen. On details and dates, there's now a view history button. This was not here previously because previously we were in version 1 of the award and there wasn't really a history to look at. But I can click there and now I can see the history of this award. I can see the version 1, which included the initial funding and information, as well as any transactions that were included. And then I can see award version 2, I can see that it was an increment, and I can see the funding that was added. I can take a look at the obligated change, obligated direct change, as well as look at the cumulative amounts that resulted from that. So this is a really useful view, especially once you get several actions on an award. And if you start putting in data corrections or whatnot, it will mark those very clearly with the transaction type. So this is really going to accumulate and be where you go to get the information about what's happened with your award to date. And that will accrue information from both the award document and time and money. I hope that this has been helpful and that you will join us in our next video when we look at putting together an award budget document for a modification.